We are pleased to have it. We're not sure it tells us much that we didn't already know. You know, a lot of talk before the grades came out about one grade doesn't necessarily define us, and we believe in that, but it's certainly a part of the big picture. And we like to say, you know, let's just do good school, and those things will take care of themselves. And that is a good enough grade that we feel like we've done good things, and we get to reap a good benefit from it. So we're pleased to have the B, but it's a little bittersweet from the standpoint of, if we'd have had a D, we weren't going to let that upset us. If we'd have had an A, we weren't going to let that define us either.
Right. When you compare the A, B, and C levels, what do you think makes the difference in those levels?
That's the thing that makes this a crazy kind of system. Is you look at different things and wonder, and even us comparing to some local schools, you can't help but think naturally that low socioeconomic status plays a part in it for sure. But even when you start doing some comparisons, the correlations aren't as strong as you might think. So then you're left to kind of wonder what makes a difference in one or the other. Now, I will tell you that's one of the big complaints of the system is there's 1,200 data points that bring into one grade. And so when I know, all the things that went into our 84, and I look at a school that, say, has an 85, and I start trying to mentally compare 1,200 data points, we might have done better here where they didn't, and vice versa. And so it's hard to say what makes one school really better than the other when there's so many different places that are melding into one grade.
In looking at this, they did not count single campus schools, and they did not count charter schools. Mm-hmm. That makes the count a little unfair, does it not?
Probably. I mean, yeah, unfair from the standpoint of it's only unfair if we're all really looking at it from a competitive standpoint. It is, we're surrounded by 3 or 4 when you say single campus schools that are K through 12, and you ask yourself, now why aren't they considered a district to be rated, but they just more or less considered them a campus and didn't rate them with the districts this time. Not sure the logic behind that, but it's funny, they say they didn't, but if you look it up, they gave a number, they just didn't put the letter. So
okay.
You can see a number on everybody and start to compare if you want to, but it's just so hard to, if we're an 84 and somebody's a 74, what's the big difference in us?
Right.
Could be growth, could be, sub-pops, could be actual passing, could be commit. There's no way to know what the differences are really.
And to help some who don't speak your lingo, sub-pops is subpopulations, right?
Right,
okay.
Yeah.
In sitting in school board meetings, I know that not too long ago you guys did kind of a rating of where the school district was, and you were looking at where you are and where you plan to be. Do you see that as more important than this A to F grade system?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, a simple example is our biggest goal right now is we want kids to read on grade level by 3rd grade. Honestly, if we can, and everything you hear in life, and some of it turns out to be folktale, but I've heard my whole life, they build prisons based on 3rd grade reading scores. They look at 3rd grade reading scores and build prisons based on the projection. And come to find out, I don't think that's entirely true, but it's almost true. Whether you go into a prison and assess the situation, 80% of the people there don't read past the 3rd grade level. And so there is a correlation. And that's a place we would much rather put our emphasis, is to really make sure we build a strong foundation, make sure people read on grade level, and that's our number one goal. We want to get to where 95% of our kids as 3rd graders read on level. We've seen over and over where what's the problem with our 6th grade scores? They're not reading on grade level. It has nothing to do really with the test or how smart they are. We've got to make sure kids can read and read at the appropriate level.
When you say that third grade level is kind of the base for this, do you feel that when kids hit that third grade level, adding to the next grade level is not as hard from that point on?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good way to say it. It just boils down to anything, the foundation. You know, for so long, really, we try in first grade to get a kid to read, and second grade to get a kid to read, and sometimes, and it's not to fault of a teacher, but we just, they got to go the next grade, but they're missing some stuff. And what we got to do is we got to build that foundation, and once the foundation's built, yes, it's all easy to build onto from then.
Yeah, they always talked about the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, we're down to reading and arithmetic.
Sure.
The writing thing is kind of passé anymore.
Well, and if writing is still tested, not quite the same, and it's probably one of our weakest areas right now is the writing, just kind of overall, and we know there's work to be done there, and we can make excuses about how kids text and different things, but bottom line, we've got to find some way to improve in that writing aspect, and right now we've really kind of concentrated on reading, and we kind of contend that even when we've had issues in math and science before, usually those issues were due to they couldn't read the problem to do the math or do the science. So we've really put a lot of emphasis on reading. Does that mean we've shortchanged writing? Maybe a little. I hate to think about it, but we definitely have some work to do in writing, and we're going to figure out a way to do it.
Will you be using these scores in any way? I know teachers groups are somewhat opposed to this. Do you feel like that if you tried to use these scores, there would be kind of a reaction against these scores?
I said in our convocation, I mean, this is such a fine line. We try to convey the message. We're not all about scores. At the same time, we do use them for certain things, and the best example I can really come up with is, if your scores are bad, we're not going to come in and hatchet you. We're not even saying you're bad. I mean, there's usually factors. We want to use that to look at the factors, look at the reasoning, and figure something out. So that's the reason we're not all about scores. It's not, well, we better make an A or you're all fired. That we don't want to be there.
Right.
But sometimes that's the feeling they get no matter what, teachers. The pressure kind of passes down. But whether the tests are good tests or not, let's just say comparing third graders here to third graders here, if they're performing at a 60% level and they're performing at a 7%, you can use the scores to determine that something's different here.
Right.
It may even be a bad test, but something, so we can use the scores for some things, but we don't want to be all about the scores. And I don't know if that makes sense, really.
Yeah, it does.
It's a hard message to convey, because we do use them for certain things, and sometimes they'll say, well, I thought you weren't all about them. We're not using this as a do or die deal, but we are using it as a tool. And what you're hearing across the state, that people that are opposed to the 8F and what have you, school's a big, lots of stuff, and we hate that we got an A, B, or C, D based on one part. But it is one part, so we do got to look at that one part and figure out how to be good at that. But even if we were a D here, does it take away from a big picture of a lot of great things we're doing?
Right.
But the D that it is does end up meaning we've got to look at some things in the academic realm and start to see where we can make some improvements.
Socioeconomic issues seem to, from comparing the districts as I compared them, socioeconomic differences do seem to determine certain aspects of the grades.
There's no doubt. There's strong correlations between low socioeconomic statuses of a particular school or district and those that have less. Do they tend to do better? They do. They tend to do better. But on one hand, I mean, if there's any positive out of this system, and I might be one of the only people that believes there's a little bit of positive in that, I just say that's the math person in me, and
right.
We've had other systems before that we claimed weren't fair.
Right.
And I go back to, this really got intense in 2013 when I believe it was tax at the time. Well, let's just take Sulphur Springs for example. Sulphur Springs, to my knowledge, as a district, never obtained a recognized status, which in that old system, exemplary would have been an A, recognized would have been a B, acceptable would have been a C. And I'm pretty certain Sulphur Springs has always been that acceptable. So you're sitting there as a C, and you don't feel like a C school. And I wasn't here most of that time, but you would contend, well, that's a system that's unfair because it doesn't take our low socioeconomic status into play. It doesn't take into account the fact that we grew a kid from point A to point B, even though they didn't pass. So we complained for years that it wasn't a fair system. This is a pretty fair system and takes all that into play. So now we're a B. And I would contend, when you measure us taking those things into account, that's probably where we should have been all along. With the tools we get, this is what we do. I always use the analogy, how would you say what's a better, how do you compare dollar store to Walmart? How do you compare us to Coppell? We're just different animals, and we can be good at what we do, and I think dollar store feels good at what they do. Does dollar store compete with Walmart? I don't think so, but in some cases I guess they do. It's hard. What's an A? How do you compare schools? It's just, we want to be the best school, but what's that mean? Even if we were an A, are we able to tout we're better than Highland Park, Coppell if we get to A status? I don't know. It gets back to that big picture. Right. We've had people not come here because we don't have a swim team.
Right.
It's a matter of what families want for their kids and experiences they want them to have. And if you compare us to the last time I had to have a conversation with a potential doctor in town, they wanted their kid to wrestle and swim. Well, I had to encourage them to look at Rockwall. That's the closest place I know you can do those two things.
Right.
So different strokes for different folks depending on what they want.
When schools are not in the business of doing social work and that kind of thing, but are there some things that a school system can do to try to help overcome some of that?
No doubt, and even though we're not in the business of it, we really have to be. We've got to move past some of the stigmas maybe of the past that we're the teachers. We're not going to do this, and this, and we've discovered that we've got to. It goes back to a goofy little thing you learn in college, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And bottom line, kids have needs. And if those needs aren't being met, and they start with just the fundamentals of water and food and that kind of thing, we do a lot of free lunch around here. Why? For that reason.
Right.
They got to feel safe. There's times we've got to we've got to work up that level of needs if we want them to be academically successful.
Speaking of lunches, I did a news story today on the fact that the free lunch is available for students through third grade. They'll all get free lunches during that. Do you think that's going to make a big difference?
It should. The good and the bad. We've always had the opportunity for families that qualify to do it. And what changed a couple of years ago is if a particular school meets if enough kids qualify, there's a threshold, and I don't even know what it is. If you've got this many kids that qualify for free lunch, then the whole campus gets it. And we've started that a couple of years ago. Well, now what's that mean? Because in theory, the kids that weren't qualifying had the money. And we know better than that, really.
Right.
So I think what it did, let's just say that threshold was 60%. Now it brings in the 40% that in theory were able to afford it before, but now they're getting free lunch. The top 20% of that probably doesn't matter, but it just brings in another level that probably deserved it, needed it, and there's just another layer that brings in. I think there's a little bit of, I'm trying to even think, I saw something, so we had it at our third and fourth, which means but now we don't have it at fourth, so they got it in third, but they're not going to give it in fourth, which would have been the same as they had it in fourth and weren't going to get it in fifth.
Right.
So there was some point it runs out. Now, I think over time, chances are good that we'll grow into maybe having that everywhere.
Right. When we look at this, we've been talking about the student quite a bit here, and of course, the teachers and their struggle. How do you think? I know you probably haven't had a chance to talk to teachers about this, but how do you think they're going to perceive this grade from their perspective as a teacher?
Well, the grade that's a B that's a district is one thing. Whether it's visible or not, each campus got graded, and so everybody's going to handle it a little different depending on the campus they're on. We talked to them on our opening day of school about not wanting this to define us in any way, and hopefully they take that to heart. Teachers tend to just put pressure on themselves no matter what we say or do. They want to be successful, they want to do good things, and they just kill themselves sometimes trying to be the best, whatever that ends up meaning. So I'm not, teachers fight for scores at times, whether we want them to or not, and there's definitely some things we can look at and say, this is a place we can get better, let's work to get better. But the beautiful thing is, really and truly, we've done a lot of great things in the last few years, and there's a lot of little hot spots that we use scores to say we did make improvement from here to here. I'll just to not isolate any one person. Sometimes I feel like you hurt somebody's feelings if you brag on one, not the other. But what we're looking for, I'll just take science. Science only gets tested in 5th grade and 8th grade, and then high school. For a long time, our science scores, particularly in 5th and 8th, were just not very good. We look at them, we use that to say, man, what are we doing? And 2 years ago, 5th grade science made a drastic change in their program. It was a risk. It was, hey, we think this will work. And science scores shot up 10, if not 20 points that year. Well, that tells you fundamentally, I know when we say we don't believe in scores, we think, well, there's someday some kid might just had a bad day and didn't pass and they should have. And I get all that, and that's true. But when something goes up 10 or 15%, that's what we're looking for, is a fundamental change in practice that we know worked. So now, here it is 2 years in a row, those science scores, well, guess what? In a year where 5th grade really did something different and shot up, 8th grades still weren't very good that year. But they went back to the drawing board, talked amongst themselves, let's try this. Mm-hmm. And a year later, their scores were shot up about 10 points. Same thing happened in social studies. Those are the kind of things we're looking for. Fundamental change in practice that really can make a difference. We don't want to be 75 one year and celebrate 77 the next. Right. That doesn't necessarily show us real change in practice. But we've had these little hot spots, several places, a couple of science, social studies, a place in math, and where that's the kind of stuff we're looking for, is where we know we tried and did something that really ended up making a huge difference.
How should the community view this, and what can the community do to help increase what's happening in the school system?
How should they had us believing and scared, in a sense, that these grades were just going to wreck us, from the standpoint of, and it doesn't matter how much we say, if we were a C or a D, that sends a message to some people that, well, my kids aren't in a very good school. And it's just not true, and we've got all these ways we can show you that and prove that if we had enough time to discuss. But so we just want them to, but fortunately, we've got a decent B hopefully the community can breathe easy that there's not something bad to have to deal with. Does that mean, us being a B, does that make us better than any C or D out there? It really doesn't. So don't. That's the other thing the community can do, is don't read too much into even a good situation. A B, can we work towards an A? You betcha, and we will. We're always going to work to get better, and the community just needs to keep supporting us and keep believing in our kids and believing in our teachers and believing in, like I said, this grade doesn't represent the incredible opportunities our kids have in theater, in band, in choir, in UIL competition. That we do a lot of great things that's not represented in this A or B. Right. And it's like I said, what does that represent? Well, it represents a lot of academics, and I know that's why we're here first and foremost. But for the kids that are at this school building on this house down here with an intention of being a builder one day, that A-B right there really doesn't mean anything for them. And those families can be ecstatic about what they're getting and the things that they're a part of. And far as I'm concerned, that's an A experience for that avenue of situation. So just don't read too much into it. It's probably the biggest thing. It's a measure of our academics, which our academics is a piece of the big picture of what we do. It's not even really a good measure. Just like I said, there's so many pieces of that puzzle. We got 4 campuses, and I'll tell you, one got the grade they got primarily because of the passing scores they got. Another got the grade they got because of the amount of growth so it's, to say we're a B doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you whether we're good at growing or good at passing or what. It's hard to cram everything into one. It'd be like a kid that takes 7 different classes at the high school, English, and we give 7 different grades, and English is English. But if I tried to say, well, we're going to take all 7 of those grades and just give you 1 grade, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.